1981. The Iran hostage affair is finally brought to a close with the release of 52 American hostages. President Reagan is shot by an obsessive Jodie Foster fan, recovers, fires 11,000 striking air traffic controllers, and signs a secret directive to support Contra rebels in Nicaragua. Pope John Paul II is also shot, so was Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat, only he actually died. I guess one of them had to stick. The AIDS epidemic begins, the Yorkshire Ripper is caught, and the first American test tube baby is born. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Donkey Kong, and the DeLorean are all released, and we see the births of Justin Timberlake, Paris Hilton, and Beyoncé. And in the world of television, things were revving up. Cable was catching on and people were reacting to it. The Writers Guild of America held a 3-month strike to establish proper compensation in this new cable and home video market, and were pretty successful in getting their demands. And also Ronald Reagan couldn't fire them. HBO and Showtime both converted to 24-hour channels, CBS created a very brief-lived cable network, and the headline story was, of course, the premiere of MTV on August 1st, one of the major defining channels of 80s cable television. If you didn't have MTV, you were like, total loser. MTV would prove to be Warner Amax's big game-changing hit, one that made them stand out from the crowd. Their previous attempt, Nickelodeon, wasn't doing so well. It continued to function as a lost leader, but had spent over a year without Star Channel to help prop it up on the back end and sell those expensive upgraded cable boxes. And frankly, the ratings weren't promising. There's actually a possibility that MTV's early success saved Nickelodeon in a way. Having a solid hit on their cable packaging allowed Warner Amax enough relief to keep adjusting and experimenting with their children's network. First step, let's polish the image. 1981 saw a gradual phasing out of their original promotional materials. The creepy kid looks into a kinetoscope in a dark room promos were out, along with Nickelodeon's original logo. The Mime promos were slowly replaced over the year with a newer, shinier logo, one that would define the Cy Schneider years. My dear, born after 1996 audience, before the Nickelodeon splat, there was the silver ball.
Find a world of magic. Come along. We can make the world your friend. Silver ball in the air, see it glow everywhere. Nickelodeon, here we go. Nickelodeon.
Okay, I know the history. I know how the splat helped save the channel. And I wasn't around for this era of Nickelodeon, but I really do dig the silver ball logo. The silver ball, of course, evokes the idea of pinball, which evokes the idea of arcades, which were huge in 1981. Well, actual pinball machines were on the decline because of the popularity of video games. It wouldn't be early Nickelodeon if it wasn't a little out of touch, but at least it was a hell of a lot closer than its original 1910s aesthetic. More than that though, the silver ball can act as a totem, an icon to build a brand around, something Cy Schneider, a former ad executive, would know a lot about. The new logo was a joint effort between Lou Dorfman and Bob Klein. Lou did the rainbow-colored balloon text, while Bob did the silver ball itself. You don't really notice it in motion, but when you look at the silver ball in detail, you can see this kind of bleak, empty landscape reflected in it. Klein's company, known simply as Klein Ann, also wrote the jingle. Remember Klein, we'll be seeing him again in Nickelodeon 1982. So, next step, what shows do we get rid of? 1981 saw the final airings of Video Comics and Hocus Focus, meaning that the only show from Nickelodeon's original 1979 lineup was Pinwheel, which the channel was still leaning into as their main event. Pop Clips only lasted for one season. Mike Nesmith never seemed to be comfortable with the station. Don't worry, music videos will be back on Nickelodeon soon enough. Children's Classics was also out. The station probably realized that dry adaptations of The Prince and the Pauper weren't really grabbing the kids' attentions. But despite the fact that I will argue forever that it was a bad fit for the station, Children's Classics was the only show on Nickelodeon that offered continuous narrative television. Pinwheel and Dusty's Treehouse were unrelated short collections, Front Row Features and Special Delivery were collections of unrelated movies, What Will They Think of Next was nonfiction, and Livewire was a talk show. Children's Classics, while the television equivalent of dry, unbuttered toast, at least had you tuning in for the continued adventures of David Copperfield. Nickelodeon was in a story drought. It needed some proper narrative television. 1981 would need to fill that need. With imported shows, of course. Nickelodeon introduced 8 new television programs in 1981, but only 2 of those were created from scratch. All the rest were either direct imports or pre-existing productions continued under Nickelodeon's umbrella. One of these 8 shows would turn out to be Nickelodeon's saving grace, but we'll get to that. Let's kick off Nickelodeon 1981 with one of their first good and proper narrative television shows, Adventures in Rainbow Country.
Let's separate.
Okay, I'll meet you back here in half an hour.
Okay.
And Pete, don't get lost.
Originally produced in Canada for CBC television in 1970, Adventures in Rainbow Country follows Billy Williams, a young man living with his mother Nancy and sister Hannah in a fishing lodge in rural northern Ontario. Along with his best friend Pete, Billy spends his days hiking, camping, fishing, just about every outdoors activity you can think of. But it's not long before they find themselves in trouble. Half the time that trouble is pretty related to the activity of the day. Oh no, we went hiking and we got lost. Oh no, we went canoeing and hit some rapids. Oh no, we went spelunking and there was a cave-in. But the other half of the time, things got pretty off kilter. For example, in the episode Mystery at Whaleback Bay, Billy and Pete go scuba diving, only to discover a sunken briefcase full of priceless jewelry, and end up involved with a couple of bloodthirsty criminals. In Pursuit Along the Au Sables, Pete is hired as a guide for a tourist to paddle across some local rivers, only to discover a kidnapping plot with a disgruntled worker who kidnapped a rich man's child for ransom. In Town That Died, Billy visits a deserted mining town to take some photographs, only to fall into a Scooby-Doo plot where people try to scare him out of town over mineral rights. And if it didn't already sound enough like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, Billy and Pete also have a psychedelic rock band. But then the show occasionally attempts to build on its own mythology, and that's when it gets weird. Billy's father, Frank Williams, is presumed dead. His plane disappeared 2 years prior, and in many ways moving to the lodge was a way for the family to move on. But the mystery of it keeps popping up. In the episode The Frank Williams File, a police officer arrives at the lodge saying that an amnesiac that fits Frank's description has been seen wandering around town. Except this guy is not a police officer, he's a crazy person obsessed with Frank Williams, wanting to gather information so that he can assume Frank's identity.
Who are you? What do you want? Money? My father's maps? Do you think you're going to discover a gold mine? Do you think there's a fortune under the floorboards of this cabin?
You wouldn't understand. Nobody understands. When I read about your father in the plane crash, I became fascinated by the kind of man he was and the life he led. I wanted to find out everything I could about him. I kept this file of newspaper clippings, photos, letters.
And you were lying. There is no man in British Columbia.
I made that up.
But way, way stranger is the episode The Return of Eli Rock. Eli was on the same plane as Frank and is also presumed dead. But then, 2 years later, Eli just walks into town with a zombie-like stupor. Our cast tries to track him down, coming across a lot of shady figures who seem to know more than they're telling. And then a medicine woman casts a curse on Eli or something, and the episode ends with Eli getting run over by a truck. We never find out why he's alive, what he's been doing these past 2 years, or any hint as to Frank's fate. For one brief moment, the series toys with the ideas that maybe something supernatural is going on. And then the next episode is about driving classic cars on mountain roads, and everyone acts as if this borderline Lovecraft stuff didn't just happen. I latch onto these idiosyncrasies because, without them, Adventures in Rainbow Country is basically just Boys Life the TV show. A bunch of boys, and only boys, going camping or fishing, and then they run into a complication. That's a perfectly fine model for a story, but when you have to do it again and again and again for 26 episodes, it would start to feel very samey without these odd, pulpy elements being thrown in. Adventures in Rainbow Country already was relishing in formula and structure. With just about every episode, we open at the lodge, where Billy tells his mom that kind of adventure he's going to be having today.
Can you get him back in time for lunch, Dennis?
Oh, sure. It'll take us a half an hour to get there, 5 minutes to pick up the shipment, and a half an hour to come home.
Can I go, Mom?
Just you remember that you have an awful lot of work to do around here before the weekend, Billy.
Okay, it'll be done.
Why are you up so early? It's only 5:30.
Going over to Wilbur Mountie's.
What for?
Help him out at the garage.
At 5:30 in the morning?
Today's special.
What's so special?
We're gonna test out the Hornet. Hurry up, Mom. They're gonna jump in half an hour.
I just have to get my jacket on, Billy.
Look, I promised Roger we're gonna watch it.
We're going to make it.
And we end each episode at the lodge with our characters discussing the plot, wrapping up loose ends through exposition, and laying out the episode's moral.
If that guy hadn't have hijacked the plane, none of this would have happened.
Well, he was pretty desperate, Billy. I hope they go easy on him.
Was he really going to keep that money?
That's what I can't figure out. What if I hadn't jumped in the Hornet? Would Vince have taken off and kept on going? Or was he really going to go to the bank?
You can't take anything for granted when you're jumping. Remember that for next time.
If there ever is a next time. I don't understand how you could do another jump today.
Oh, I had to. Or else I'd lose my nerve like Jack Sheldon.
It's all very pat, very clean, and introducing the unpredictability of jewel thieves or dark magic is necessary to balance that out. Actually, come to think of it, there isn't actually a whole lot of wilderness in this wilderness adventure show. Oh, there's a lot of trees, a lake, and brush, but if you're expecting a lot of nature glamour shots, you don't really get them. The beauty of the Canadian landscape feels more incidental than it probably should. There's almost no wildlife in the entire series. No shots of birds flying around or squirrels climbing up trees or anything like that. Probably because this was a noisy film production that most animals steer clear of. What's more, there isn't a lot of survivalism or even basic camping etiquette in this show. You're not going to learn what to do if you get lost in the woods or how you should smother out your campfire or anything like that. Billy and Pete aren't even really that smart with this stuff. They forget to tether their own boat, they decide to explore an abandoned mine which promptly collapses on them, and then there was this one time they committed fish genocide. Okay, I should probably... In the episode Lake on Blue Mountain, Billy and Pete discover a lake where fish are dying off, and then witness their adult friend Dennis secretly dumping bags of poison into the lake. Assuming that Dennis has become some sort of Captain Planet villain, Billy and Pete borrow a truck and tank, net about a dozen living fish from the poison lake, and transport them into another lake. Before they can celebrate their immensely pitiful victory, they discover from Fish and Wildlife that the fish from the other lake had an awful disease and had to be destroyed, and they didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want to scare off tourists, which sounds like it would be incredibly dangerous to residents and visitors who might come to the lake unaware that it's diseased and poisoned. But, whatever. And now Billy and Pete have contaminated this lake, so they're going to have to destroy all the fish in this lake. They try to pass this episode off as being about nature conservation, but one of the tricks to nature conservation is telling other people what's going on. I don't think I've seen a show where good-natured protagonists cause this much destruction. Adventures in Rainbow Country's biggest weakness is its leads. It never seems fair ragging on bad child actors. They're, a dime a dozen. But Stephen Collier and Buckley Pitawabano, who play Billy and Pete respectively, are very stiff, seemingly incapable of emoting, talking in perpetual monotone. If I had to guess, they were probably cast due to their willingness to get dirty and do their own stunts. Look at how Billy gets out of this moving car. Yikes, this was not a safe film set. To balance out these two planks of wood, Billy and Pete are usually accompanied by fun adult figures. We've already seen the bush pilot Dennis, we also have the photographer Roger, and my personal favorite, Dougal, the tugboat skipper, who looks like a living E.C. Seeger cartoon. Fun fact, Dougal is played by Alan Mills, a Canadian folk singer who composed, of all things, I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly. Yeah, that was this guy, Sexy Sailor Santa.
I know an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. I guess she'll die. I know an old lady who swallowed a spider that wriggled and tickled inside her. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly, but I don't know why she swallowed the fly. I guess she'll die.
As I mentioned before, this show was very boy-centric. Billy's little sister Hannah rarely gets involved with the adventures, and the few times she does, she has to be saved. Billy's mother Nancy is played by the biggest name in the cast, Lois Maxwell, best known for being the original Miss Moneypenny, playing the role in 14 James Bond films. Granted, not the most proactive character. And in this show, Nancy's primary role, even in the episodes involving her presumed dead husband, is to be the one that cooks the meals.
Have any of you eaten?
No, we figured we'd get a snack in Whitefish Falls.
Oh, Hannah and I will fix you up with something.
Mom, they're here.
Oh, good. Then they can have a hot lunch.
Hey, want to give us a hand?
Oh, no. I'm not good at domestic things. I'm too busy for that.
Help yourself to some coffee over there, Sidney.
I hope our guests aren't on a diet.
They better not be, or we'll be eating bread for a week. Bring Pete back for dinner. I'm making a salmon casserole, and I'll feed you as soon as you get here.
Salmon casserole, come on.
Oh, all right. I might put on a roasted beef, too.
That's a bit better.
Adventures in Rainbow Country was created by William Davidson, a Canadian filmmaker who had previously tried to get the Canadian film industry off the ground, but after a couple of major box office bombs, settled on working in television. Before this show, Davidson served as the producer of The Forest Rangers, a similar program about kids having wilderness adventures. They even share a cast member, Susan Conway, who played Billy's sister Hannah. And now we come to everyone's favorite topic of discussion, race. The Forest Rangers had a handful of First Nation characters in its cast, most notably fur trapper Joe Two Rivers, but they were all played by white actors, which was part of the course. Of course, a native actor might be allowed his background role to be part of the crowd, but a regular speaking role? Nah, let's get a white guy, slather them in face paint, and call it a day. The US is pretty bad at this too, of course. In fact, I know we have this image of Canada being the United States' really polite neighbor, but if there's one area where they compete with our country's general rottenness, it's in their treatment of the Aboriginal population. Look, Google the Canadian Indian residential school system and prepare to get really mad. So, in a sea of red face, you can imagine the cultural importance of a mainstream Canadian television show with a First Nations main character played by an actual First Nations actor. Buckley Pitawabano holds an honorable distinction of being the first. Buckley Pitawabano just walked into our office one day and introduced himself. He was Cree and from the Lac Saint John region of Quebec. His marvelous smile and personality made up for the slight awkwardness in speech, but he was a real human being and a tremendous asset to the series, both off and on screen. A class gentleman, about 20 at the time, and a role model for younger native boys. He was the most loved member of our cast and crew. Wait, he was 20? He was not a child actor? Well, I don't want my opinion of his acting chops to overshadow the importance of his presence on Canadian television. Pete was in every episode of the show, had several plots where he was the main character, including stories with other First Nation characters played by other First Nations actors. Aboriginal kids were finally seeing people like them on mainstream television. That is empowering and critical. Buckley only did a few more projects after Rainbow Country before retiring from acting, but his cultural presence is still recognized today, and he was given the Cree Legend Award by the Cree Native Arts and Crafts Association in 2013. The episode Long Tough Race is particularly noteworthy in dealing with contemporary attitudes between First Nations peoples and the rest of the country. A doctor, played by the late Margot Kidder, comes into town and insists on treating a young First Nations girl, but the family refuses her help. The conflict is initially framed as one of belief, that the family's culture doesn't believe in civilized medicine, and if the episode stayed there, that would be pretty crappy. But the episode layers in an undercurrent of distrust of Canadian system of care.
Have you ever met this Dr. Rhodes?
I've seen her around. She was kind of young to be a doctor. She looks more like a kid.
I hear she's pretty good.
I hear different.
What does that mean?
She's always poking her nose in other people's business. Acts more like a social worker than a doctor.
Oh, I'm sure she means well.
That's what I'm afraid of.
It's important to point out that this show is made during the middle of something called the 60s Scoop, where 20,000 Aboriginal children were forcefully removed from their homes and put into foster care and adoption programs, with a strong emphasis on cross-racial adoptions with white families. If the state determined that your household was unfit by their arbitrary standards, they could take your child away. This doctor is a figure of state power. You have a sick First Nations kid in a poor First Nations family. All she would have to do is make a phone call, and that kid is gone. And the doctor doesn't place all of this together. She sees herself as a righteous bringer of medical science, trying to help those poor other people.
The people up here make it very hard for you to help them. They seem suspicious and they seem to shut you out.
Be patient. Wait until they come to you.
But medical science can't afford to be patient. We've come so far that we can't wait for their local customs.
With this context, consider this shot of the doctor walking through the family's house, and how she casually touches this little girl she doesn't know as she's passing by. Just touching native kids without their consent, or even properly introducing herself. There's no active ill intent in the action, but she clearly has no respect for non-white spaces. This is an episode that could only be made in a certain time and in a certain way. And while it's not perfect, it pretty much justifies the entire show in itself. It shows us a version of the show that puts aside the wilderness adventure and pulp storylines for serious, reflective, contemporary commentary. And now to counteract that, an evil clown episode. This show has an evil clown episode. It's called Girl on a Tightrope. The circus is in town and one of their clowns sees Hannah's picture in the paper, and she looks just like his daughter who died years ago from a high wire act. Something in him snaps, and he sneaks into the lodge wearing full clown makeup, kidnaps Hannah, and does this.
There. Don't cry, Kathy. You'll spoil your face. Kathy, remember how I used to make you laugh?
Look, I'm not afraid of clowns. I don't have that phobia. I've never been creeped out by them. But this is legit upsetting. The clown goes around strangling our heroes before falling out a window, and what? What was that? What was the moral? What was the point? It was just a half hour of evil clown in the middle of my Boy Scout show. It's this weird inconsistency that probably led the show to getting mixed reviews by contemporary critics, though the ratings were great. Adventures in Rainbow Country was at one point the 5th most watched show on CBC, only being beaten out by the day's blockbuster shows like The Partridge Family and The Wonderful World of Disney. The show wasn't renewed for a second season. According to William Davidson, a TV film and a sequel series were shopped around at various points, but nothing ever came of it. But Rainbow Country still remained an ever-present thing thanks to never-ending reruns. Adventures in Rainbow Country would end up filling a role we in the United States have given to shows like Bonanza and Magnum P.I., perpetual syndication for people lying on the couch with a hangover at 11 in the morning. In fact, while the show's seen no home video release, its constant syndication well into the 21st century means it's super easy to find among tape traders and file sharers. Guys, I'm happy to announce that Adventures in Rainbow Country is the first show on Knacks that I've watched every episode of. And it got shopped all around the world. I know it also aired in Germany and Australia, and of course in the United States on Nickelodeon. I actually have the ad the production company sent to the US markets to try and find a home for the show, which attempts to tie the show to similar American programming. In the audience-holding tradition of Lassie, Adventures in Rainbow Country combines exciting stories with natural settings. It was perhaps his comparison to Lassie that caught Cy Schneider's eye while shopping for potential shows for his network. Nickelodeon even ended up airing Lassie reruns between 1984 and, wow, 1996. Heck of a run. Nickelodeon ran the show for 2 years, and while it's not remembered as an all-time classic, it did begin a trend of Nickelodeon having a small spot for wilderness fiction. Not a major genre for the channel, but a consistent one. Reruns of Lassie and Flipper, original sitcoms like Hey Dude and Salute Your Shorts, animated shows like The Wild Thornberrys, arguably later imported shows like Ship to Shore and H2O Just Add Water. There's usually something on the channel for the more outdoorsy types, and it began with Adventures in Rainbow Country. This is a very, very messy, inconsistent show. It's really cool in some ways, kind of crappy in others. For less critically minded little boys, there's a lot of fun here. Adventure, excitement, mystery, evil clowns, but there's a lot less here for little girls who might want to join in on those adventures. The show pretty much keeps all of its female characters in the kitchen or in distress, but also it was a major step in First Nations representation in media, and that's something nobody can take away from it. It's not a must-watch, but maybe it's a must-know about.
Nick, 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 Nickelodeon. Nick, 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 Nickelodeon.
Next time, we look at the spiritual sequel to Adventures in Rainbow Country, and this one actually has a girl main character. Today's shout out goes to Outside Looking In, viewing First Nations peoples in Canadian dramatic television series by Mary Jane Miller. A very useful, if admittedly somewhat sloppy text in mapping out the history of First Nation characters and stories over the history of Canadian television. A bit pricey, but if you can get it through your local library, worth a look. This video is possible thanks to my awesome, generous patrons on Patreon. I couldn't possibly do this without you guys. But we're not out of the woods yet. If you'd like to see Knacks and other Pop Arena shows continue into the future, perhaps consider a small donation. Even $1 a video really helps keep the lights on. Also, you can like, share, subscribe, hit that bell, all of which helps get these videos seen. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.